Will the protests against Egypt's president spread? Demonstrators demand the resignation of Abdel Fattah El Sisi because they say he's corrupt. How will he and the army respond to one of the largest challenges to his rule so far? This is Inside Story. Hello and welcome to the programme. I'm Imran Khan. Protests are rare in today's Egypt. President Abdel Fattah El Sisi has stifled dissent ever since he deposed his predecessor in a military coup 6 years ago. But the government ban on protests has been defied in several cities over the past 2 nights. Security forces in Suez fired bullets and tear-gassed at protesters who were demanding Sisi's resignation. Dozens were arrested near Tahrir Square in Cairo, where the revolution to overthrow President Hosni Mubarak unfolded. The defiant display of anger flared when protesters heard the latest corruption allegations. Now, Sisi denies squandering public money. The former military contractor who made the allegations is warning of more protests.
I am still waiting for a response from the Defence Minister and security forces saying that Sisi is out. He is no longer fit for office. Next Friday is his ultimatum. I am waiting for their decision. The next step is a multi-million-man march. We started in our local streets, but next Friday we will take to the major squares.
So what are the allegations against President Sisi? Egyptian businessman Mohamed Ali worked as a military contractor for 15 years. Now living in Spain, he began posting videos this month alleging Sisi spent millions of dollars of public money building palaces, villas and hotels. Ali also accused Sisi's wife, Intisar Amir, of squandering public funds on vanity projects. And he accuses Egypt's transport minister, Major General Kamal al-Wazir, and several military leaders of stealing money from construction companies working with the army, including his own. And Ali accused the military's engineering authority of failing to invite tenders and directly awarding projects to companies. Let's bring in our guests. In Berlin, Magdi, Middle East and North Africa researcher at Human Rights Watch. In Washington, D.C., Tawfik Hamid, Egypt domestic affairs analyst. And here in Doha, Omar Ashour, founding director of the Critical Security Studies program at the Doha Institute. A welcome to you all. I'd like to begin with you, Magdi, in Berlin. What Muhammad Ali has done is effectively broken 2 big taboos within Egyptian society: criticising the army and even more criticising the president. That's sparked a movement of people out on the streets. Could this movement build? Are we seeing the new Arab Spring?
Well, that's a question. I think there is no definitive answer to it, but I believe that the past 2 weeks, what Muhammad Ali has done is that he actually managed to do things that all political actors have not been able to do in the past few years. And President Sisi and his government has suffered irreparable damage to their image, to their reputation, and any use of violence, such as what happened by security forces on Friday night, will actually cause more damage. I think the main reason why actually people took to the streets in response to Muhammad Ali's calls is because there are no other channels, no other windows for any peaceful action in Egypt, in a normal society, in a normal, I wouldn't say even democracy, but some pseudo-democracy or semi-democracy. I think allegations of corruptions could be met by could be covered by newspapers, by articles, by investigative journalism, by judiciary institutions. But in Egypt, all these things do not exist. And the only thing people have now is to protest, to go to the streets and to show their anger and frustration that has built up to unprecedented levels in the past years.
Let me bring in Tawfik Hamid here from Washington, D.C. Are these baseless allegations made by a disgruntled businessman, or is this a real threat to President Sisi's rule?
I see these allegations as as not a threat to the President Sisi, because obviously when you see the allegations, he's accusing the president or the system of using some money to build some places. He called them palaces for the president, which is a normal part of many governments, to put some money to build things for the president's office, for meetings. And he didn't prove or show any evidence that any of this money went to President Sisi account, for example, bank account personally. So you can't say really it is corruption. It's something that was built, irrespective. The decision could be right, could be wrong, that's another issue, but it is certainly not corruption. Corruption is when you give government money to an employee to put it in his personal account. The second thing is the people of Egypt itself didn't react to this message, as you can see from the very small number of the demonstrators in the streets. Reuters described this as few hundreds going. And I can say even if it is in thousands, even if it is a million, this represents 1% of the Egyptian society. They didn't come up for more than 10,000 all over the country. But let us assume 1 million people went. It is 1% of the society. So it's hard to describe what sort of democracy Muhammad Ali and the other people are demanding if 1% of the society want to direct the country against the will of the majority of people, especially when we know the fact that Muhammad Ali himself thanked the military and the police for not using harsh hand with the demonstrators. They allowed them peacefully, in most cases, to demonstrate. And yet the Egyptian people didn't go into the streets. So no one can say that the Egyptians didn't go because they were scared of the police and military. The guy himself, Muhammad Ali, the guy who initiated the demonstrations, thanked the police and the military for being peaceful with the people in the streets. Yet the Egyptians didn't go. So I see the many Egyptians recognize that these allegations are, they can have some base. Yeah, that there is some things or palaces that have been built. But this could be a correct decision to improve the image of the country. This may be incorrect decision, but in all situations, it's not a proof of corruption. No money went to the bank account of President Sisi himself.
Tawfik,
and this was the message of Sisi when he wants, yeah.
But Muhammad Ali doesn't have to prove corruption. All he has to do is allege it. The genie is then out of the bottle and people are out on the street. Omar, Ashour, I want to bring you in here. It's out. People are out there now. People are out in the streets. Could this build? You know, we saw this in 2011, but these are protesters, very seemingly people who are younger and probably weren't out on the streets in 2011, who have come out on the streets today. Could it get bigger?
It could. Egypt has all the structural conditions for a successful civil resistance campaign and mobilization. A very young population on one end, intense, sustained grievances that have been going on for a long time, even beyond this generation, and especially on two issues highlighted. One is the issue of corruption that Muhammad Ali more or less became sparked in a way that is unconventional, in a way that was a lesson in strategic communications, if you wish, where, although the guy does not even have a university degree, he gave a lesson to all the PhDs in the opposition, how to communicate with the working class and how to explain with them some very complex issues in a very simple language. The information, by the way, he gave was not new. Most of the specialists I know who work on the military economy understand the level of corruption, actually give more data and more numbers. He just simplified the data and the numbers in a very communicable language to the working class, and I think that's his real skill set. So that on one end. So what he did really is you have the structural conditions, you have the grievances, you have the repression, you have the huge level of unprecedented level of repression, because even compared to Mubarak and Nasser's era, this is takes it to another level. The level of corruption as well is unprecedented, I believe. All what you need is a young population, and all what you need is somebody to spark this. And this is what happened in 2010 with the death of Khaled Said in June 2010, who basically paid with his life to get Egypt two years of freedom between 2011 and 2013. And yet now we have somebody else who's sparking in a very different way. He didn't pay with his life. He's more or less was part of the corruption, and then decided to provide a very intense message with the identity of the messenger is very important as well. And yet you have that kind of mobilization that is quite new. That's on one end. On the other end, how will the regime is going to deal with it? This is the big question mark. What we saw now is that the extremely heavy-handed crackdown on demonstrations did not happen. It was mainly arrests and then releases after that, some releases after that. It was tear gas as opposed to just usual firing and automatic rifles and assault rifles and sometimes machine guns. The crackdowns that we saw in 2013, 2014, 2015, later on 2017, did not materialize this time, which tells me that there is something going on probably within the security and the military apparatus. Unclear so far. We have three things that developed. One was a statement from General Sami Anan that came out concurrently with the Muhammad Ali's allegations. Sami Anan was the former chief of staff in Egypt's army. He was the second man in the ruling junta in 2011. And he is imprisoned now for 10 years. And the second one, and he's so part and parcel of the regime, part and parcel of the leadership in the military establishment, who is also issuing statements talking about, toppling the regime very, very clearly, or toppling the Sisi specifically. The second thing came from also the questioning that we know now that some of the activists who were arrested were questioned about the links to General Shafiq, who was Mubarak's last prime minister, a general who wanted to run for elections, came in second in 2012, or millions basically voted for him, 48% of the electorate in the second round. And then after that, he wanted to go for presidential elections, arrested in the UAE, and then deported to Egypt, and then placed under house arrest in Egypt. So there is worries among let's say, the faction loyal to Sisi within the regime that Shafiq has been inspiring or maybe organizing some of this, hence the questioning. And then the third thing, which is, I believe, very important, it was not focused upon, it was not really that much in the media, is the visit by the current Minister of Defense, General Mohammed Zaki, who was formerly the head of the Presidential Guard during Morsi's time. And this specific general, you can say that he was the executioner of the military coup back in July 2013, because it was his decision that mattered. If he decided to protect President Morsi, probably the coup wouldn't have been very successful, or you would have seen some sort of clashes happening. But his decision to support the coup then and basically abandon his constitutional orders led to the success of the coup. So that same person now is the defense minister. He has ideas, he has certain idea, or let's say an experience of how to run a coup. Now he's the defense minister, and he went to the special forces, one of the special forces bases, and spoke to them quite in a long way.
Omar, you make several very interesting points. I do want to bring in the other guests. I do want to. I do want to. But this point,
can you let me finish this one, because it's very important. He talked to them that he has their backs, and he has their backs can mean two things: either shoot the protesters and I have your back, or stay with me and we change this rotten status quo and I have your backs as well. It can mean two things. During Tantawi's time, when he gave the same talk to the soldiers, it was televised, by the way, under Mubarak, it meant that I have your backs, like you can remove Mubarak and I have your backs. So we'll see how it goes.
Like I say, you make several very interesting points. I want to bring in Omar and Magdi in Berlin to pick up on one of them. What I find fascinating, what I think a lot of people find fascinating about this, is that Muhammad Ali was able to speak the people's language. He was able to mobilize them because of the simplicity of his words, because of the way he spoke. He's almost become a folk hero on the streets of Egypt. Has that surprised people in Egypt? Has that surprised the establishment in Egypt?
I think the protests on Friday night and also in some cities yesterday surpassed any expectations. But again, I think the reason why we reached this level of unpredictability and uncertainty is precisely because this government has crushed all basic rights of the Egyptian citizens. There's simply no way to voice criticism or to peacefully demonstrate without risking your own life or risking going to jail. This President Sisi has actually caused the really unprecedented human rights crisis in Egypt's recent history. I really disagree with people who say that the security forces have dealt maybe more smoothly or less harshly with protesters on Friday. We are talking about hundreds of arrests. We don't even know the number until now. Lawyers on the ground are running everywhere to police stations and detention centers just to be able to know how many are arrested. We don't need to see hundreds killed to call it a harsh or a harsh aggression or violence. We are used to this kind of violence from the Egyptian security forces. It's true that they have killed hundreds of protesters in the last years, but using tear gas and firearms and arresting hundreds of protesters from what was not actually huge protests. When you talk about hundreds from thousands, that's a big number. I think Muhammad Ali managed to reach people because of his simple language, because he actually comes from this, from this community. He worked for the army for 15 years. Things he talked about could be seen and smelled and heard. And when you walk in the streets, you can see the palaces and villas he's talking about. President Sisi, when he spoke last week, he didn't even try to deny what Muhammad Ali was talking about, but he actually used funny discourse saying that he's building these palaces for the image of Egypt, which is very funny. I think was also played the role in provoking average Egyptians, lay people in believing more Muhammad Ali and also responding to his calls for protests. I think what happened so far was actually expected. We have been talking, I think analysts who follow Egypt have been talking for years about the risk of seeing another uprising, another particularly social uprising. But no one actually could predict when, how, and how big. But now we are seeing this happening, and it was expected. When you block all the channels of peaceful expression and peaceful exercise of rights, what do you expect? Now we are seeing in the streets, people in the streets actually are people that we mostly don't know. The figures and faces we have seen in 2011 uprising, this generation have mostly actually seen the protests from home. They were home on Friday night watching the protests, and people in the streets are mostly younger. Maybe they were teenagers during the 2011 uprising, and I think they have learned a lesson, and they also reached a level of frustration and disappointment that led them to join the protests.
Tawfik Hamid in DC. There's a chink in the armour of the Egyptian army. There seems to be a little bit of a panic now. This man, Muhammad Ali, has managed to really get his message across, and people are out on the streets. Do you think that the army's position is weakened, that the president has met his match?
Thanks for the question. Actually, I see the opposite completely here, because initially, your point may be correct. There was some worry, some maybe possible level of panic. But when the reaction of the people to Muhammad Ali's message was so weak, and this is not my opinion, this is the reality on ground as seen on Reuters and in many other news media, that the number of people was too small compared, for example, to January 25 revolution or June 30 revolution against Mohammed Morsi, when the nations or the people of the nations revolt against a leader like Morsi, for example, they went in tens of millions. The same with Mubarak. So in this situation, we are talking about few hundreds or few thousands of people in the streets. So my point is the magnitude of the reaction. I see that if I am in the Egyptian army, I would be very relaxed now that, or happy that the reaction in the street proves that the majority of people are not with this direction. They do not revolt against the leadership. Many of them are under pressure. We cannot deny this. Yes, a financial pressure because of the changes in the economy and the subsidy system. We can fully understand this, but yet the Egyptian people still, many of them, if not most, sees hope. Otherwise, they would have demonstrated in tens of millions in the street as they did during Mubarak or during Mohamed Morsi. So in this time, despite the power of the social media, the ability to reach more people, yet the reaction was too weak. So I see it as a victory here for the military to prove that the majority of the population are not with this message and are still supportive of President El Sisi. That is based on numbers. It's not just an opinion.
Revolutions always begin in small number. Let's bring in Omar Ashour who's with us in Doha. Our guest seems to be saying that actually the army should be happy that there are only a few people out in the streets. We don't know the number. However, is this an opportunity for the army, for President Fattah El Sisi, to be able to try and change things around, to address these allegations of corruption and actually address what the protesters are demanding? Is there an opportunity here?
Sure. Just 2 points. The number issue, we really have to stop misleading with quoting incorrect numbers because it's getting annoying. This has been going on for a while, since 2013. We know that Tahrir Square, if you put 4 people in every square meter, which is very difficult, you need really four small people. The whole capacity of it is 120,000. If you took all of the streets, all of the 2 bridges, south and north, put the same figure, 4 people in every square meter, you will reach 300,000 at max. Same thing for Rabah Square. There was no maximum capacity around 300,000 with all of the streets around it at maximum capacity. So the whole idea of millions, it's I said this in 2011. And I told it mainly to opposition activists: stop saying million because there are no millions on the streets, and you have to be realistic about that. So the amount of misleading figures that came out, 17 million to 30 million and so on, I'm sorry, this is all BS. So that's on one side. On the other side, the only way to know what the electorate want, or what the majority wants, if you wish, is in elections, in free and fair elections. And this did not happen in Egypt's history. Before 1952, women did not even vote. After 1952, men and women vote did not really matter. The only period that this happened was between 2011 and 2013, and we had a show of more or less half of the electorate. Like at maximum, when Egypt had 52 million eligible voters, around 26 million of them showed up. It was in the parliamentary elections, and then about 25 and something million showed up. And this is how it works in Egypt. So we need to stop really misleading the viewers and respect the viewers and give them proper information at the level of an expert, not at the level of cheap propaganda. That's on one side. On the other side, yes, we have an issue here we have a crisis of leadership, to be honest, whether on the military side or on the opposition side. The crisis of leadership that I think the current leadership has no capacity to compromise, has no vision. It's not the founding fathers of the Americas. It has not the capacity, not the psychology for it. The egomania is so high, psychological complexes are so high, the level of pettiness is very, very high. So does it have a vision? I don't think so. Can it compromise and build the nation and build a constitutional republic? I don't think so. Now we go one level down.
Omar, I'm really sorry, I'm going to have to disturb you there because we are running out of time, and I do want to bring in our other 2 guests very, very
Just one
quickly.
thing about
we are actually running out. We are actually running out of time,
right,
and I want to bring the other 2 guests in. Just very quickly, Armin Magdi in Berlin. Is this an opportunity for the army to say, OK, there are problems in our society and we do need to address them, and will they take that opportunity to address these concerns from the people?
Well, at Human Rights Watch, we released a statement calling on President Sisi to publicly call on his government and security forces to allow peaceful protests and to refrain from using violence. I think this is an opportunity for Sisi and ranks inside the government to actually realize the level of anger and frustration and to actually take 1,000 steps backwards, if possible, at least, to actually allow citizens their rights and to stop the nationwide crackdown that had left almost no one untouched by this scale of crackdown. I think, unfortunately,
and with that, I'm afraid we are going to have to leave it. We are actually out of time. I would like to thank all our guests, Magdi, Tawfik Hamid and Omar Ashour. And thank you too for watching. You can see the programme again anytime by visiting our website, aljazeera.com. And for further discussion, go to our Facebook page. That's facebook.com/AJ Inside Story. And you can also join the conversation on Twitter. Our handle is @AJ Inside Story. From me, Imran Khan, and the whole team here, bye for now.